So we've been through a lot of weird and interesting stuff in this article, but this is the crown jewel of this article: President Bush on Gog and Magog in the Middle East. So while I was researching my last video and I was gathering material, I came across this article, and it's a very interesting article. It does give us different perspectives into the same phenomena, the matter of Gog and Magog, and how the Western society views it. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in this article, so let's just dive into it. So this is basically about Gog and Magog in the Melbourne Royal Arcade. So this is how the article starts. What follows here is a story of good versus evil, of the apocalypse, of the impending doom of the end of days, of the scripture of the Old Testament, the book of Revelations, and the Quran. So of course there is a lot to take in over here, but what is mentioned over here in the top two lines is actually true, and there is of course a relation of this subject with all these three major religions. So the reason why we just want to take a look at these things is to have a broader understanding. Of course, guidance in this matter comes from Quran and Hadith, but this video is just not for Muslims. It's also for our Christian brothers, so they can see it, they can watch it, and maybe they can learn something from it. And maybe we can also clear out some confusions that our Christian community has about this subject. So let's see in what capacity Gog and Magog are mentioned in Torah. So we just search Gog and Magog in Torah and we come up with this result. So this is also a process that I want to teach you guys. It's just about asking simple questions, that why is this written over here, right? And then you just go on searching for it. So that's usually what I do. And this is the topmost result, and it's already quite interesting. I'll be delving deeper into the subject from different perspectives later on. It's said over here in Ezekiel 38, Gog is an individual and Magog is his land. So Gog is a person belonging to the land of Magog. So this might not be exactly correct, but they are of this view. And this might have been changed over time, as it is mentioned over here as well. So in Genesis 10, Magog is a man, but there is no mention of Gog. And centuries later, Jewish tradition changed Ezekiel's Gog from Magog into Gog and Magog. So even you will hear Muslim scholars say Gog and Magog, but this is where linguistically it stems from, Gog and Magog, which is the form in which they appear in the book of Revelations, although they are people rather than some geographic location. So but their concept is that Magog is some land. So which land is Magog? So we over here have 1874 map with biblical place names. So if we take a look at this map, Magog is over here and it's on the northern side of the Caucasus. So right now this place is going to be Ukraine and Russia. So I think this is where that misunderstanding stems from, that Russia is Magog, or Russian people are somehow involved in this chapter of Gog and Magog. And although this is widely accepted as well, but this is actually not the case, and the situation is very much different. And actually President Bush is much well aware of the real situation, as he also mentioned in the telephone call with the French president, which we are going to take a look at later on. So one other thing that the author also mentioned over here is the mention of Gog and Magog in Quran. Now when Gog and Magog were mentioned in Quran, the question was asked by some Jewish scholars, and of course they asked about the traveler, about Zulkarnain, who we have already mentioned in another video was Cyrus the Great. But the answer also contained information about Gog and Magog, and they must have known about it as well. So they asked for one thing and they got two in return. And possibly at that time, even the Jewish people who asked the question did not know the relation between Gog and Magog and Zulkarnain, although they respected Cyrus the Great or Zulkarnain themselves a lot. And he is of course also mentioned in the Torah, as we've mentioned in a previous documentary. So we'll continue with the article. Then he says, sorry, no, cancel that. So over here he's basically saying that cancel all that thing about the biblical references, about mention in the Torah, about the mention in the Quran. So he's trying to be funny. But then he starts with the weird part. What follows here is a story from our pagan ancestors, a story that tells of giants, Trojans, and human sacrifice. Well, the truth is the story behind Gog and Magog, the two imposing and fanciful timekeepers, come from a blend of biblical, religious, pagan, and military mythology. These two 7-foot pine giants, who have been striking the time on clock since 1892. So one thing I want to mention over here, in the previous video I mentioned about the two mountains in Australia that were named Gog and Magog. So it's quite funny that these mountains were named almost around the same time as these statues were constructed. So it further says over here that these statues are modeled on figures found in London's Guildhall and symbolizes the conflict between the ancient Britons and the Trojan armies. The myth goes that the two giants were captured in battle by the Trojans and served as porters at the gateway of the palace, later occupied by Guildhall, and it is the ceremonial center of the city. Gog and Magog are considered the traditional guardians of the city. So this is quite strange. They were first captured and then they were used as porters. But now they are considered as guardians of the city, and they also hold ceremonies honoring Gog and Magog in London. So this is one of the pictures that recently came out. You can see Magog on the left and Gog on the right. And another thing about City of London, which City of London are they talking about? Is this that City of London which is a tourist destination, or is it that City of London which is within that City of London? That's really confusing, and I think it's supposed to be that way. And you'll find the main banks in that City of London, and as far as I can understand, even the Queen cannot enter that City of London within the City of London without the permission of the mayor. And you can search for this City of London within City of London. So I think you'll find some interesting stuff. And then continuing with the theme of confusion, he further states that you'll also find these intriguing chaps in Russia, as we already mentioned, Jewish, Hindu, and Irish literature. Of course, we already mentioned in Jewish literature, and there is, of course, a lot more which we will cover in some later videos. But then he says they literally pop up everywhere. Geographical locations are often named after them, such as Gog and Magog Hills near Cambridge in England, Mount Gog and Mount Magog in Western Australia, two hills in Tasmania named Gog and Magog, and many more. There are even two big oak trees named after them in Somerset. So what happens is, if someone doesn't know that what they're looking for, they'll find the mention of Gog and Magog in reference with Australia, in reference with London, and all these different places, even Tasmania. So what this does is this creates a little bit of confusion. So who is exactly creating this confusion? It must be someone with a lot of resources and friends in high places. And now the interesting part. And here's a bit of weird trivia. Former French President Jacques Chirac said George W. Bush told him before Iraq invasion in 2003, the same invasion that was carried out because of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which of course they never found, which they openly admit now. So over here, President Bush is trying to convince Jacques Chirac to go to war with him in Iraq. And what is the reason that he gives? Gog and Magog are at work in the Middle East. Okay, Gog and Magog are at work in the Middle East. Where exactly in the Middle East? Inshallah, we'll get to that. But over here, these two sentences are in the middle of this article, and that's actually not the complete story. The complete story is that President Bush called Jacques Chirac, and after trying to convince him to come to war with him, and he was getting the indication that he was not going to get the support he wanted, he said these words to him, that Gog and Magog are at work in the Middle East. So what happened after the conversation is that Jacques Chirac told his secretary that I want to understand what exactly did he mean by saying Gog and Magog are at work in the Middle East. Now there is something that we need to keep in mind. Just like in Muslims, how Muslims understand the concept of Gog and Magog, there are also some differences between the Christian understanding. There are those who are very limited but who know exactly what is going on, and they belong to the camp of Mr. Bush. But there is also another second class who are actually more, who think that Gog and Magog are Russia and they're going to invade Israel some point in time. Inshallah, we'll shed some light on that later. But anyhow, the secretary went and fetched some religious scholar, and guess which explanation did he present to the President Jacques Chirac? Of course, it was the second one. So President Jacques Chirac said that this guy is out of his mind and he's a religious fanatic and so on and so forth. And he might as well be. But the thing is that he knows what's going on. The thing over here which is quite sad is that even though these matters have been quite clearly mentioned in Quran, in Hadith, but many of our scholars, our intellectuals have not really been interested in explaining this subject properly and not putting in the required effort to explain these matters in a clear way. And that is why I've made this channel, so we can really move away from assumptions and go towards hard facts that are in Quran, in Hadith. So the method that I adopt is that I put Quran first, and the topmost is Quran. Then there are ahadith, then there is stuff in history, there is science, there are intellectual arguments by some very smart people. So there is a lot of material that we can learn from, but the priority is that Quran is going to lead the way. And if that's the rule we follow, then inshallah we will always come to the right conclusions.